"Step away from the tank now," shouted the base security officer, his voice cutting through the dry California air like a blade. Floodlights snapped on around Hangar 17, revealing the lone figure of a small black girl, her grease-streaked arms raised beside a half-open engine panel. Soldiers stormed in, weapons drawn, confusion stamped across their faces. "She was inside the prototype?" one whispered. Colonel Avery stormed forward, glaring at the men. "What in God's name is happening here?" The girl, unfazed, looked up. "Your tank's fine now. But the sabotage? That's a different story." Silence fell. Someone exhaled sharply. Within seconds, alarms sounded base-wide. 12 hours earlier, Fort Sentinel had simmered in its usual rhythm. Engines roared, boots thudded across tarmac, and classified technology was being prepped behind layered clearances. Most personnel had never even heard of Sable Hawk 1, a next-gen tactical tank under SEAL command. It had failed every major test since arriving from development. What no one outside a tight ring of officers knew was that every attempt to diagnose the glitch had failed. Until that day, when James Keller, the lead civilian engineer, brought along his daughter, Amara. "She'll stay out of the way," James promised. But Amara wasn't the stay-out-of-the-way type. Amara Keller had grown up elbow-deep in machinery. Her mother had been an aerospace engineer before cancer claimed her 2 years prior. Her father, James, had filled the silence with socket wrenches, schematics, and long weekends repairing engines just to teach her how pistons breathed. Amara's gift was uncanny. She didn't just fix things, she listened to them. At 12, she had already disassembled her neighbor's motorcycle just to silence an irregular throttle. And now, standing beside the nation's most confidential ground weapon, she itched with the feeling that something was wrong, and that she could fix it. Captain Blaine, the military supervisor for Sable Hawk 1, watched the girl with a smirk. "Cute. We're babysitting now?" he muttered. James ignored the jab. He was already frustrated. After 3 weeks of testing, the Sable Hawk's engine would randomly seize during maneuvering drills. Sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours. Every expert had walked away baffled. James hoped he'd spot something fresh. But when Amara quietly asked if she could look under the thermal junction panel, every soldier within earshot laughed. "That panel sealed tighter than a senator's secrets," one tech said. But Amara wasn't joking. She was already moving toward the ladder. "Hey, she can't go up there," barked Captain Blaine. But Colonel Avery, watching from above the floor, raised a hand. "Let her," he said, his voice edged with curiosity. The laughter stopped. Amara pulled herself up with smooth confidence, unlatched the panel, and stared inside. Her fingers skimmed wires and circuitry with delicate precision. "You changed sensor brands during upgrades," she called out. "But never recalibrated the control interpreter. The tank's AI thinks it's overheating even when it's not. That's why it freezes." Self-preservation. Silence. Every trained mechanic in the room blinked. "She's guessing," someone whispered. But she wasn't. Not even close. Captain Blaine scoffed. "And you figured that out by poking at wires for 30 seconds? Amara nodded calmly. "No. I figured it out after listening to the engine sputter for 15 minutes. It's not the sensor, it's what the sensor is triggering." She jumped down, boots landing with a soft thud. "If I'm right, there's a second protocol kicking in that isn't listed in the logs." James's eyes narrowed. "A silent override?" Amara nodded. "Something external is pinging the AI's failsafe. I bet it's remote." Her words struck the colonel like a thunderclap. If that were true, someone wasn't just careless. They were hiding something. Colonel Avery stepped down from the balcony. "What's your name, kid?" he asked. "Amara Keller, sir." "You're saying someone embedded an unlisted kill command?" "Yes," she replied. "It mimics overheating, but the shutdown signal isn't coming from the engine. It's routed through a dummy relay." Blaine interrupted. "That would mean someone tampered with the diagnostic software. That's a serious accusation for a child." Avery turned sharply. "If she's right, it's more than serious, it's treason." A tense silence followed. "Let her run the test," the colonel said. "Fully supervised. Let's see if our laughingstock is about to become the only one not in trouble." Under tight watch, Amara connected an external diagnostic rig and activated the bypass protocol. Within seconds, the Sable Hawk system flagged an alert, "Unauthorized relay command, source unknown." Captain Blaine paled. "That shouldn't be possible." "It is," Amara replied. "Because someone installed this relay after the last firmware update. Look at the date stamps, they were manually altered." James's jaw tightened. "Who had clearance for that install?" Avery's voice dropped to a whisper. Only top brass and black-level contractors. The weight of what Amara had uncovered began to dawn on the room. The tank wasn't just broken, it had been compromised. "I need security on this hangar. Now," Avery barked. Guards locked down the exits. Blaine looked ready to collapse. "Sir, we don't know who did this or why." Amara calmly walked back to the console. "You don't? But I have an idea where to look." She loaded the log archives and tapped in a string of hex codes. The console blinked twice, then displayed a name, C. Mason, External Contractor ID, VIA 7391. Avery's face hardened. Charles Mason? He left the project 6 months ago. Maybe he didn't, Amara said. Maybe someone made sure the software remembered him even after he left. News traveled fast in places like Fort Sentinel. Within the hour, military intelligence had pulled Charles Mason's files, and what they found made everyone sweat. Mason had last logged into a secure terminal 2 weeks ago, from inside the base. That wasn't just against protocol, it was supposed to be impossible. Blaine began stammering. "Sir, with respect, no kid should have access to these logs." Avery turned slowly toward him. "No adult in this room caught it either." "She did. Which means we owe her more than an apology, we owe her protection." That's when the colonel made a decision that would change everything. Colonel Avery strode into his command office and picked up the encrypted line reserved for high-level emergencies. "Give me the Pentagon. Priority code Black Echo." As he waited, his gaze drifted to the hangar's live feed. Amara stood quietly beside the Sable Hawk, arms folded, watching everyone with an expression far older than her years. She had just exposed a hidden backdoor into a prototype SEAL vehicle, and possibly a deliberate act of sabotage. The Pentagon answered. "This is Sentinel Base. We've identified unauthorized code inside Sable Hawk 1. Civilian child discovered it. And sir, the name involved is Charles Mason." A long silence followed. The response came swiftly. "Lock everything down. No data leaves the base. Expect investigators by 0600 hours. That girl doesn't leave your sight." Avery hung up, the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. "What kind of world are we living in," he muttered, "where a 12-year-old black girl has to expose military corruption because the grown-ups were too blind, or too loyal, to see it?" Down in the hangar, Amara was already dismantling the diagnostic relay. "What are you doing?" Blaine barked. She didn't look up. "Removing the lie." Colonel Avery watched her through the glass. "Or rewriting history." That evening, the mood inside Fort Sentinel had shifted from skepticism to silent awe. Engineers who had chuckled earlier now watched Amara work with quiet deference. Even Blaine kept his mouth shut, occasionally glancing over his shoulder as if waiting for consequences to strike. Amara methodically removed the bypass relay and replaced it with the original OEM firmware. She recompiled the control software and watched the tank's internal readouts stabilize. "She's breathing normally now," she said, smiling faintly. "Like she should." Her father stood beside her, eyes glistening. "You just saved the program, baby girl?" Amara shook her head. "No, Dad, I exposed it." At dawn, a convoy of black SUVs pulled through the gates of Fort Sentinel. 4 Pentagon investigators, 2 intelligence analysts, and a Department of Defense ethics attorney stepped out. Wordlessly, they were led to the sealed hangar. Colonel Avery greeted them grimly. "We have everything you need: logs, physical evidence, names, timestamps." One of the analysts leaned over. "And the child?" Avery gestured toward the observation platform. Amara sat cross-legged on the floor, flipping through pages of diagnostics she had printed out. "That's her," Avery said. "Her name is Amara Keller. And she's the reason you're not looking at a crater." Inside the makeshift war room, the Pentagon officials reviewed hours of surveillance footage, Amara's logs, and the code she had flagged. One of them, Director Monroe, watched in silence before asking, "How did she even recognize the bypass?" Avery shrugged. She said she listened to the machine. Monroe glanced up. "What are her credentials?" "She's 12, sir. Her only credential is being smarter than every engineer in this room." Monroe's expression remained unreadable. "She'll need to be debriefed. Formally." James stepped forward. "With all due respect, you don't get to interrogate my daughter like a threat." Monroe blinked. "No, Mr. Keller. She's an asset." The debriefing room wasn't built for children. Sterile walls, a single steel table and rows of blinking monitors made it feel more like an interrogation cell than a conference room. Amara sat calmly across from 3 high-ranking officials, her fingers gently tapping the table. Her father stood behind her, silent but firm. "Amara," Director Monroe began, "we're not here to scare you. We need you to walk us through everything, step by step." Amara nodded. "You're asking the wrong question," she said plainly. "You want to know how I found the relay. What you should ask is, how many other tanks have it? That landed like a bomb." "Other tanks?" General Harlow leaned forward. "You're suggesting this backdoor isn't unique to Sablehawk 1? "I'm saying," Amara replied, "it's part of the firmware package sent during the last patch cycle. And you deployed it fleet-wide, right?" The silence that followed said everything. Monroe turned to his assistant. "Pull maintenance records from all Sablehawk deployments in the last 90 days. Amara added, "Start with the Pacific and Gulf divisions. Most of those units got the update first." Her tone wasn't cocky, it was clinical. Calculated. Monroe stared at her like she was a blinking server rack. "Who are you?" Within the hour, the Pentagon received confirmations from bases across the globe. Identical shutdown errors. Identical unexplained logs. No one had thought to connect them, until now. A dozen top-tier tanks, all suffering from phantom errors, all showing invisible relay interference. Monroe returned to the hangar in a sweat. "Colonel Avery, this is a national breach. We've been blind." Avery nodded grimly. "And this girl just handed us the flashlight." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. A 12-year-old black girl had spotted a pattern missed by the most elite defense minds in the country. Not because she was trained, but because she noticed. By sunset, Amara was being referred to in hushed tones as the Prodigy. Tex whispered her name like legend. Reporters hadn't gotten wind yet, but that was only a matter of time. Colonel Avery took Amara and James aside. "You'll both be under protective order for now. This goes beyond a tank issue. We're looking at internal compromise, maybe espionage." Amara blinked. "Then you should check who signed off on Mason's access." Avery stared. "Why?" "Because his clearance was deactivated, but the system didn't log an alert. Someone manually buried it. And that someone still has access to override commands." A chill crept into the room. The following day, as cyber analysts combed through archived logs, they found the name Lieutenant Commander Ellen Voss, a high-ranking Navy official who had quietly approved Mason's final upload. Her credentials had gone unscrutinized because of her clearance level. But one line of Amara's audit caught the anomaly. Voss's signature had been forged, layered beneath an encrypted macro that timed out after one use. "She didn't authorize anything," Amara told the Pentagon team. "She was framed." James looked at his daughter. "You just cleared a woman's name." Amara shrugged. "Someone tried to blame her. I just read what the machine remembered." Word spread to Washington faster than fire on dry brush. By the next morning, Amara Keller's name was being whispered in conference rooms at the Pentagon, murmured between generals, and slipped into encrypted memos to the president's office. A 12-year-old civilian had uncovered a nationwide vulnerability in America's most secret armored division, and traced its origin to a forged clearance. A full congressional briefing was scheduled in under 72 hours. In the meantime, Fort Sentinel prepared for its most classified event yet, a direct visit from National Security Advisor Dana Wexley, known as the Closer in D.C. circles. She only showed up when the stakes were existential. Wexley didn't knock when she entered the command room at Sentinel. "Where's the girl?" she asked. Colonel Avery gestured toward the observation balcony. Amara stood near the tank again, this time explaining to a team of cybersecurity agents how she traced the false relay signal. 12 years old, Wexley muttered, and smarter than every contractor we've hired in a decade. James stood nearby, watching protectively. Wexley turned to him. "Your daughter just altered the national threat landscape. She's a security priority now." "She's a child," he replied. "She's your child," Wexley corrected, "but she just walked into the battlefield we've failed to defend." Later that evening, Wexley sat down with Amara in a secure chamber. No cameras. No recorders. Just truth. "You understand what you've done, right?" she asked. Amara nodded. "I stopped something bad. But it's not over." "Explain." Amara looked directly at her. "You think it was sabotage. But I think someone was testing you, testing the system. Seeing how long it would take before someone noticed. Like a stress test." Wexley leaned back slowly. "And you think you were the variable they didn't plan for?" "No," Amara said. "I was the variable they didn't respect." Silence fell. Wexley finally smiled. "That's the best kind." The following morning, Amara stood in front of a semicircle of military leaders, cybersecurity directors, and congressional liaisons inside a secured Pentagon conference room. She wore a simple gray hoodie and jeans. No uniform. No badge. Just brilliance. Director Monroe opened the session. You are all here because of a child who should not have had the burden of uncovering a national vulnerability, but did. Amara was introduced. Someone cleared their throat. Miss Keller, how did you even know what to look for? Amara stepped forward. Because your machine kept shutting down like it was scared. I just asked what it was afraid of. She explained the relay. The false logs. The buried clearance signature. And then she delivered the line that dropped jaws. You've been looking for hackers. But the flaw was never external. The system's failure was the feature. Audible gasps. One general whispered, internal kill switch. Another muttered, covert override command? Who authorized this? Wexley raised a hand. That's what we'll find out next. Amara finished with calm certainty. Machines remember what humans try to hide. You just need to listen. No applause. Just stillness, the kind reserved for moments when everything changes. A child had just flipped the lights on in the dark. The next 48 hours unraveled like a spy thriller. Internal Affairs traced the hidden firmware update to a third-party contractor named Saltrex Dynamics, a company long rumored to have quiet deals with defense leadership. On paper, Saltrex hadn't touched military systems in over a year. But Amara's log files told a different story. Ghost IPs, midnight upload pings, and packet transfers rerouted through unlisted servers. It was deliberate, precise, hidden in plain sight. One server led to an encrypted folder labeled Athena. The files inside? Instructions for disabling any tank in the Sable Hawk fleet remotely. Amara had uncovered not a glitch, but a kill switch. A secret task force was launched that night. Saltrex headquarters in Virginia was raided at 2:17 a.m. What they found shocked even seasoned operatives. Shredded contracts, burned hard drives, offshore payment logs to anonymous government officials. The scheme had likely started 5 years prior, timed with a massive DoD restructuring bill. Worse, it appeared certain members of the Joint Defense Committee had knowledge, possibly approval. Amara, now relocated to a secure military facility with her father, was debriefed again. You just pulled the thread, one investigator told her, and now the whole sweater's unraveling. Amara frowned. Then maybe stop knitting the same way. By morning, headlines had leaked. Child tech prodigy exposes military sabotage. Pentagon under fire for flawed security. 12-year-old black girl saves America's most expensive tank project. Fort Sentinel went into full lockdown. Journalists swarmed the gates. Online theorists exploded with praise, doubt, conspiracies. Some tried to dismiss her findings as fabricated. Others hailed her as a genius patriot. But inside the secure compound, Amara just wanted quiet. I didn't mean for this to happen, she told her dad. I just wanted to help. He nodded, brushing her braids from her face. Helping the right way always shakes the wrong people. But the danger wasn't over. A backdoor agent, someone still embedded, was leaking data. Investigators found a transmitter stashed in a drone maintenance bay near Sentinel's west wing. The signal had been relaying Amara's debriefing transcripts. She's being hunted, Wexley said during an emergency briefing. Someone out there sees her as the only loose thread. The room fell deathly silent. Amara was moved to an undisclosed location. Special forces escorted her and her father in a decoy convoy while the real transport slipped out in a supply truck. Amara didn't cry. But she did clutch the circuit diagram she'd drawn that first day, like a shield. Inside a cold, quiet safe house in rural Utah, Amara sat in front of a whiteboard and a laptop stripped of all internet access. Monroe had one last question. Amara, if you hadn't been there that day, how long would it have taken us to catch this? She looked up, eyes steady. You wouldn't have. Not until the tanks shut down during combat. Or worse, turned on your own. Her words carried the weight of lives saved. Monroe swallowed hard. So what do we do now? Amara stood and erased the board with one clean swipe. Start listening to the people you underestimate. The Capitol rotunda buzzed with tension as media outlets lined the halls, waiting for a moment that had never happened before. A 12-year-old black girl testifying before Congress in a closed-door hearing about military cybersecurity sabotage. Amara sat quietly outside the chamber, dressed neatly in navy blue, her hair pulled into two soft buns. Are you nervous? Her father asked. She shook her head. Machines don't lie. People just have to listen. Inside, senators shuffled papers, preparing to face the prodigy whose discovery had set off the largest internal military investigation since the Cold War. The room grew still as she entered. Senator Langford cleared his throat. "Miss Keller, can you explain, in simple terms, how you uncovered the sabotage?" Amara leaned forward. The tank was acting scared. It shut itself down even though nothing was wrong. So I checked its logs. The logs lied. But the wiring told the truth. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Another senator asked, "Why did you keep digging?" Amara didn't hesitate. "Because I've seen what happens when people ignore what doesn't look important." She glanced toward a row of stiff military advisors. "Sometimes the right person just doesn't wear the right uniform for you to listen." A congresswoman from Georgia asked gently, "Do you understand how big what you did really is?" Amara's voice dropped. "I know how many people could have died." Her father stiffened behind her. "I also know if I looked different, or older, or if I was wearing a badge, you'd be calling me a hero, not a complication." The room went silent. It wasn't bitterness in her voice. Just clarity. You don't have to like who the truth comes from. You just have to believe it. Even the most rigid senators found themselves nodding. The child before them had clearer vision than most people they trusted with power. After the hearing, Amara was ushered into a quiet chamber, where National Security Advisor Wexley waited beside the President's Chief of Staff. "You understand you'll never be anonymous again," Wexley said. Amara nodded. "I didn't do it to be famous." "We know," Wexley said. "Which is why we're offering something different." She handed over a folder labeled Project Compass, a program previously reserved for prodigious minds working in covert tech development. "You'll be educated under full security, mentored by the best and never pressured. You'll work only when you choose." Amara flipped through it. "Does it come with decent snacks?" Everyone laughed. By week's end, Amara's face graced newspapers, magazine covers, and television specials. But the true power of her story wasn't just that she fixed a tank. It was that she exposed a flaw in the system's trust hierarchy, and forced the world to admit it. At Fort Sentinel, the Sable Hawk fleet was being recoded from the ground up. Saltrex's executives faced indictments. The Kill Switch project was dismantled. And multiple high-ranking officials quietly resigned before hearings could begin. One commander was overheard saying, "A child saved us. Not a soldier. Not a scientist. A child who just wouldn't shut up about a blinking sensor." When Amara finally returned home to the modest two-bedroom townhouse in San Diego, nothing felt quite the same. Her old neighborhood looked smaller. The kids she once tinkered beside on bicycles now stared at her from across the street like she was a legend. "I liked it better when I could fix stuff without people watching," she muttered. Her father chuckled. Too late for that. Reporters still loitered at the corner. A drone hovered briefly before being escorted away by a security drone the government had gifted them, something Amara jokingly nicknamed Buzzkill. Even privacy now came with a defense budget. Inside, her room remained untouched. Her posters of circuit diagrams, her stacked books on quantum physics, her mother's old soldering iron still mounted on the desk. Amara stared at the chair she used to sit in while her father repaired military trucks in the driveway. "Do you think Mom would have believed me?" she asked quietly. "She would have understood you," James replied. "She always said machines only listen to people who listen first." Amara smiled. "I guess that's where I got it from." Then she walked to her desk, pulled out her tools and whispered, "Okay world, what else are you hiding?" Within a month, Amara's Project Compass schooling began. Conducted through private streams and in-person visits from engineers, military advisors, and scientists, her curriculum was tailored to her strengths. But it wasn't just science. She was taught about ethics, about power, about history. Wexley personally oversaw a team ensuring that Amara wasn't being groomed into a weapon, but raised into a wise defender. She wasn't thrilled about being watched so closely, but she understood why. "You stopped a silent war before it started," Wexley told her once. "That makes you important. But staying human? That makes you powerful." Despite the lessons in surveillance, Amara never lost her edge. She hacked her security drone just to prank Wexley on a video call. She once bypassed a foolproof Pentagon firewall just to prove that a software update was overdue. She wasn't being disrespectful, she was reminding them she didn't work for them. She worked with them on her terms. "You're the youngest threat and the youngest hope we've ever had," Wexley said, laughing after the prank. "Good. Maybe you'll finally stop ignoring girls like me," Amara replied. And then she casually handed over a fixed version of their broken quantum authentication system. Her story rippled beyond headlines. STEM programs nationwide saw surges in applications from young black girls. Universities rewrote internship rules to include under 18 candidates. Amara received letters from thousands of children who now believed their ideas mattered. "You made me think I could be more than just curious," one letter read. Amara taped it to her wall. Not the awards. Not the medal from the president. Just that letter. Because that was the part she believed in most. Not the tank, not the scandal, but the reminder that one curious girl with oil-stained fingers could save a nation just by not giving up. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon, months after the scandal had settled and the headlines had faded, Amara heard a knock at the door. Not the rapid knock of reporters or the careful knock of security detail. This one was different. James answered cautiously. Standing on the porch was a man in full navy dress blues, medals gleaming. "Lieutenant Commander Shaw," he introduced himself. "I served with your mother." Amara stepped forward, wide-eyed. "You knew her?" Shaw nodded. "She once saved my unit in Kandahar with a field mod that shouldn't have worked. When I heard what you did, I had to meet you." They sat in the backyard under a fading sun, Shaw sharing stories Amara had never heard, about her mother reverse engineering IED sensors, rerouting power grids with just pliers, saving lives without needing weapons. "She didn't fight battles," Shaw said. "She solved them." Amara listened in silence, her fingers tracing the edge of her notebook. "Everyone thinks I'm her," she said softly. "But I didn't do this to be like her." Shaw smiled. "That's how we know you are." He reached into his coat pocket and handed her a small velvet box. Inside was a military compass. She wore that until her last mission. Amara stared at the compass. It was worn, scratched, but sturdy. She held it in her hand and felt the weight, not just of metal but of legacy. "Thank you," she whispered. Shaw stood to leave but paused. "There's one more thing. The new prototype, the updated Sablehawk? We want you to name it." Amara blinked. "Me? It wouldn't exist without you." She thought for a long moment. "Call it Rebecca," she said finally. "Because sometimes, machines don't need names that sound like weapons. They need names that remember who kept people alive." Shaw saluted. "That's the kind of future we've been waiting for." The new Sablehawk rolled off the assembly line with a fresh interface, clean firmware, and one name stamped onto its side in bold paint, Rebecca. Every crew assigned to it received a training packet co-authored by Amara Keller. Every system log included diagnostic redundancy inspired by her early work. The tank wasn't just smarter now. It was honest, transparent, human. And at its heart, behind its steel and software, was a child's insistence that someone listen. In a special ceremony broadcast to defense forces worldwide, Colonel Avery spoke one line that echoed through the ranks. "She didn't just fix our tank, she recalibrated our integrity." Amara sat in her bedroom that night, legs curled under her, watching the ceremony replay quietly on her laptop. She didn't cry, but she did smile just a little. Not for herself, for her mom. For every girl told she shouldn't touch wires or question authority, or dare to speak when grown men were in the room. The compass lay beside her keyboard. Her journal was already halfway filled with new sketches. "They'll forget again," she told her dad. "Systems always do." He smiled, tucking a blanket around her shoulders. "Then you'll just have to remind them." And Amara knew she would. Months passed. Life slowly settled, but the impact of what Amara had done continued to echo in quiet ways. She received a letter from the White House, thanking her for her service and offering full scholarship grants for any university of her choice. She didn't frame it. She folded it neatly and put it in a drawer. Instead, she spent her time working on something new, a device that listened to machines the way she did, but trained others to hear them too. "I'm building a translator," she explained to Wexley on a secure call. "Not for code. For intuition." Wexley just smiled. "Of course you are." One morning she was asked to attend a quiet unveiling. Not a press event, not a ceremony, just a plaque, mounted inside Fort Sentinel's newly rebuilt Hangar 17. Read. "To the girl who listened when no one else would. You didn't just fix our tank. You reminded us to listen, to question, to think. In memory of every unheard voice before you, and every unstoppable one after." Below that was her name, Amara Keller. And beside it in bold, age 12. She stood there in silence, her fingers brushing the metal. "Machines don't lie," she whispered. "But people have to be ready to hear the truth." In the weeks that followed, Amara was invited to speak. At colleges, at think tanks, even at the United Nations. Most times she declined. "I'm not a speaker," she'd say. "I'm a builder." But one request made her pause, an invitation to teach a summer workshop for girls in tech. Most of them black, most of them doubted, most of them just like she once was. She said yes without hesitation. They need to see what listening looks like, she told her dad. Not just to machines. To themselves. Her first class? How to tell when a system is lying, and how to speak louder than it. The final test of her character didn't come from sabotage or Congress. It came from herself, when the Department of Defense offered her a permanent advisory position, with high security clearance and influence in future weapons development. She said no. Not because she didn't believe in defense, but because she believed in purpose. I won't build weapons, she said. I'll build resilience. They accepted her terms. She would serve only in civilian innovation, working on non-lethal tech that protected lives. I'm not here to make things stronger, she told the final panel. I'm here to make them smarter. Years from now, historians would call it the Keller disruption. A moment when a 12-year-old black girl rewrote the rules of who gets to be brilliant, who gets to be believed, and who saves the day. But to Amara, it was never about the spotlight. It was about the silence. About the ignored errors. The missed warnings. The blinking red light that everyone called a glitch, until someone stopped and asked why. That someone was her. And long after the tanks were updated, after the systems were cleaned, after the titles faded, one truth remained unshakable. She listened. She spoke. And they finally heard her. In a small glass case within the Smithsonian's Hall of Innovation, nestled between the Apollo capsule interface and the first Apple prototype, sits a faded spiral notebook. Its cover is worn, its pages filled with sketches, wiring diagrams, and margin notes written in pencil. At the bottom of the first page is a name, Amara Keller. Above the display is a quote etched in brass. The moment we stop assuming brilliance has a uniform, we start saving futures. Visitors often linger longer here. Not because of the tank. Not because of the scandal. But because of what that notebook represents, audacity at age 12. James Keller still keeps his daughter grounded. Fame didn't change their chores, their Saturday morning breakfasts, or their backyard tool shed. Legacy doesn't make you special, he told her once. How you use it does. Amara still helped neighbors fix their doorbells. Still tuned Mrs. Langston's aging Buick when it sputtered. And every time someone said, "Aren't you that girl from TV?" she just smiled and asked, "Do you have a Phillips head screwdriver?" She hadn't changed. The world just finally caught up. She would go on to patent 3 non-lethal defense technologies by the time she was 16. She refused to trademark her AI diagnostic model, instead open sourcing it for global use. Her reasoning was simple. When systems fail, people shouldn't have to wait for a billion-dollar solution. They should have access to one that works. Universities called. Tech companies offered salaries in the millions. But Amara was never chasing titles. She was chasing better answers to the same question. Why didn't anyone fix it sooner? One evening, while presenting to a classroom full of high school girls in Baltimore, Amara shared something she never had before. I almost didn't speak up, she said. They laughed at me. All of them. But if I stayed quiet, they would have called the failure an accident. They would have buried it. And one day soldiers would have died. Not because the machine failed, but because no one listened to the one voice that wasn't wearing a badge. She paused. So I spoke. Not to be right, but to be responsible. The silence that followed was sacred. That night, she walked past a mural freshly painted on a nearby wall, her face beside her mother's, both gazing into the distance with tools in their hands. Above them in brilliant gold, the words, "Fix what they won't. Build what they fear. Speak when they don't." Amara stopped and touched the edge of the painting. Still so much to fix, she whispered. But she wasn't afraid. Because now, everywhere she turned, she saw girls just like her, heads high, sleeves rolled up, voices strong. She'd started alone. But now the world was full of listeners. Because she spoke first. The Department of Education eventually partnered with Amara to create a nationwide STEM initiative named Keller Code. A program designed not just to teach coding or engineering, but curiosity, critical thinking, and the courage to challenge systems. The core philosophy? Trust the question, not the title. Within a year, over 10,000 schools adopted the curriculum. In classrooms from Chicago to Lagos, girls hunched over circuit boards, debugging with purpose, inspired by the story of one kid who didn't wait for permission. Amara visited many of those schools quietly. No speeches, just observing, listening. And when asked what she thought of the program's impact, she said, "It's not about creating more Amaras. It's about never needing one again." On the anniversary of the day she exposed the sabotage, Amara returned to Fort Sentinel. Hangar 17 had been transformed into a learning center, filled with prototype displays and a massive interactive exhibit named the Moment of Pause. A recreation of the exact second she stepped back from the tank, turned to a room full of doubters, and told them what no one wanted to hear. As she stood there again, older now, she closed her eyes and let the silence settle. That silence, the one that used to hold her back, now echoed with something new: belief. In every corner. In every kid. And most of all, in herself. If this story inspired you or gave you chills, make sure to subscribe to the channel right now. We bring you powerful, emotional, and unforgettable stories like this every week. Stories about underdogs, truth seekers, and people who rise when the world doubts them. Don't miss the next one. Hit that subscribe button and join a community that believes in voices that matter.